It began with a whisper, not the kind that fades into silence, but the kind that spreads like wildfire behind gilded palace doors. A murmur passed between tightly sealed lips in Montecito. It was quiet, fragile, almost accidental. But once it escaped, there was no putting it back. Princess Eugenie, standing beside her husband Jack at a private garden gathering, leaned toward a trusted friend. Her voice dropped, her gaze darted, and then came the words that would ripple through royal circles like a stone in still water. Augie, they borrowed him. Just for a bit. For pictures. Meghan, she said they had no choice. And just like that, everything changed. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. For years, the public had been swept into the Sussex fairy tale. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the rebels who broke free from the royal cage, became symbols of a modern love story forged in fire. They defied the monarchy, stepped away from tradition, and built their future in the land of the free. And along the way, they gave us Archie and Lilibet, their beautiful children, the physical embodiment of their new world. But what if none of it was real? What if the very foundation of that story, the innocent faces smiling in carefully edited Instagram photos, the baby bumps on magazine covers, the lullabies whispered behind Montecito walls, was just another illusion in a well-rehearsed performance? That's the story whispered in Buckingham's deepest corridors. A story that has remained taboo, mocked, dismissed, or carefully ignored by major networks and royal correspondents. But now, thanks to an unguarded moment from Princess Eugenie, it has been cracked open like a fault line in the monarchy's fragile surface. According to Eugenie, her own son, August Brooksbank, was temporarily placed in the care of Meghan and Harry, not just for familial bonding, but for optics, for storytelling, for press. This isn't just another rumor cooked up by social media sleuths. This time, the allegation comes from within. Eugenie, known as one of the few royals who remained close to Harry after Megxit, has always carried herself with quiet loyalty and discretion. But even discretion has its limits when the truth festers long enough to start burning holes through one's conscience. So how did it all begin? How did Meghan Markle and Prince Harry go from new parents to the subjects of one of the most bizarre controversies the royal family has faced in decades? How could a royal child, beloved, photographed, and celebrated across the globe, have been borrowed from his biological mother for the sake of preserving an image? And more importantly, what happens now that the truth may finally be out? Over the course of this story, you'll travel through the early cracks that appeared in the Sussex narrative, the whispers that grew into full-blown suspicions, and the bombshell confession that threatens to unravel a royal myth carefully curated for years. We'll examine the timelines, the body language, the headlines that didn't quite add up, and the private circles that began distancing themselves long before the rest of the world caught on. You'll hear the voices of insiders, the emotional toll behind palace walls, and the chilling possibility that the world's most famous couple may have built their new empire on borrowed children and borrowed truth. But don't expect a simple tale of right and wrong. This story is messier than that. It weaves together love, pain, ambition, and betrayal, each thread tangled in the next. Meghan Markle, once hailed as the breath of fresh air the monarchy desperately needed, now stands accused not just of deception, but of manufacturing motherhood itself. Prince Harry, once the broken-hearted son of Diana, may be caught in a nightmare of his own making, trapped between loyalty to his wife and the undeniable weight of public reckoning. And Princess Eugenie? The quiet royal, the peacemaker, the bridge between two warring sides. She has, perhaps unintentionally, pulled the pin on a grenade that has been ticking since the day Archie's birth was announced. Was it an accident? A calculated leak? Or simply the moment truth finally demanded to be heard? As we unpack this explosive story, you'll be left wondering just how deep the deception goes. Could the Sussexes really have faked parenthood for image? If so, how did they pull it off under such intense public scrutiny? And most disturbingly, what happens to those who help them keep the secret? By the end of this video, the picture you thought you knew may never look the same again. But be warned, this is not a story for the faint of heart. It is not neatly wrapped in palace-approved bows or glossed over by curated PR campaigns. This is the story behind the velvet curtain, the one the royal family desperately hoped would stay buried. But it didn't. And now, it's time for the world to decide. Will the truth set the monarchy free, or burn everything to the ground? The next chapter begins now. Ready to follow the trail? From the moment Prince Harry and Meghan Markle announced their departure from royal duties in 2020, their story took a dramatic turn, one the public hadn't seen in generations. They weren't simply stepping back from the spotlight. They were taking that spotlight with them, aiming it squarely on a new life defined by independence, authenticity, and above all, family. But behind that narrative, behind the carefully filtered images and curated interviews, something far more complex was taking shape. And at the center of it all was a portrait, not of a couple, but of a family. The foundation of their post-royal identity was built on the powerful image of loving parents forging a new world for their children. In every interview, every photo op, every documentary moment, the message was clear. Meghan and Harry were now defined not just by their escape from the monarchy, but by the new life they were creating for Archie and, later, Lilibet. But what if that very foundation, the cornerstone of their brand, wasn't real? To understand how this illusion was crafted, one must look back to the early days of Archie's supposed birth. In May 2019, Buckingham Palace released a brief announcement stating Meghan had gone into labor and, shortly after, that a baby boy had been born. But from the outset, the timeline felt off. Reporters were puzzled. Hadn't she already given birth hours before the palace even said she was in labor? Why the confusion? Why the delay? More questions emerged when Meghan and Harry chose to forego the traditional hospital steps. The famous Lindo wing photo call, which had become a rite of passage for royal mothers since Princess Diana cradled baby William on those iconic steps. Instead, Meghan insisted on privacy, and Archie's first public appearance was a highly controlled event at Windsor Castle 2 days later. No one outside their small inner circle had seen the baby immediately after birth. There were no images of Meghan leaving a hospital, no glimpses of weary but joyful parents stepping into the sunlight with their newborn. Just 2 days of silence, and then a perfectly polished couple, holding a mysterious infant whose appearance sparked endless speculation. Observers noticed inconsistencies in Archie's skin tone and different lighting, the way Meghan cradled him, and even the way the baby interacted, or didn't, with the surroundings. Conspiracy theories sprouted quickly, dismissed just as fast by mainstream media as delusional and cruel. But some royal watchers insisted something didn't add up. Everything about this felt off, one commentator remarked at the time. Too controlled, too distant, too polished. Still, the brand worked. Harry and Meghan became a symbol of progressive parenting, breaking free from tradition, protecting their child from the harsh glare of public life. And yet, that same child was mentioned constantly, on Oprah, in their Spotify and Netflix deals, in their interviews with Time and Variety. The privacy they claimed to guard so fiercely became a shield to deflect scrutiny while still maintaining relevance. Their narrative, built so tightly around their children, became a powerful marketing tool. Netflix reportedly paid nearly $100 million for their documentary content, much of it involving their family life. The public saw photos of Archie feeding chickens, of Lilibet in her crib, of Meghan reading bedtime stories. But no one ever saw them in real time. The children were always just slightly out of focus, slightly turned away, appearing only in snapshots or behind-the-scenes cuts. This strategy was brilliant in its subtlety. It gave people just enough to feel connected, while denying them enough to raise suspicion. It allowed Harry and Meghan to use their children as emotional leverage in their feud with the royal family, highlighting the decision to deny Archie a royal title, for example, while avoiding any real exposure that could undermine their control of the narrative. Then came the birth of Lilibet in June 2021. This time, the confusion was even more intense. The couple claimed their daughter had been born at Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, yet the facility confirmed no media presence or even the usual local stir that accompanies a high-profile birth. The announcement came days after the alleged birth, and once again, no photos accompanied the moment. No hospital exit, no beaming relatives, no royal fanfare. Instead, Meghan and Harry dropped a statement online, paired with a black-and-white image of them cradling a baby under a tree, a baby whose face was turned away. By now, this pattern had become predictable. The mystery of the Sussex children was both a talking point and a smokescreen. As questions mounted, the couple leaned further into the idea that public scrutiny was harmful, that they were simply protecting their children from racism, from media intrusion, from the very forces that, in their view, had destroyed Harry's childhood. It was a clever defense, one that painted all doubters as bullies and all inquiries as invasive. And yet, beneath the surface, people couldn't help but notice the cracks. Royal staff, former friends, and even medical insiders hinted at inconsistencies. No birth certificates were released immediately. No family members had met the children for months, even years. Meghan's own estranged family publicly questioned whether the pregnancies had occurred as claimed. Still, the couple maintained their wall of silence, with Harry fiercely defending their choices and Meghan accusing critics of perpetuating colonialism and misogyny. At the heart of it all was a carefully orchestrated illusion, one designed not just to protect privacy, but to enhance the Sussex brand. By portraying themselves as heroic, modern parents battling an outdated institution, Harry and Meghan positioned themselves as relatable and brave. Every headline about their family became a piece of emotional currency, traded for sympathy, attention, and influence. But what happens when the illusion begins to unravel? The confession from Princess Eugenie didn't just challenge their story, it threatened to destroy it entirely. Because if Archie was not their biological son, if Augie had truly been borrowed, even briefly, the implications were seismic. It meant the cornerstone of their post-royal life was not just exaggerated, it was fabricated. And in a world already reeling from political misinformation and media manipulation, the idea that a royal couple could fake parenthood for public image felt both surreal and eerily plausible. This first chapter serves as the lens through which all other elements of the story will be examined. From the beginning, Meghan and Harry positioned themselves as victims turned victors, parents who chose love over legacy. But if the love story was tainted by deceit, what remains of their legacy? The brand they built was airtight, but even the strongest facade crumbles when exposed to truth. And now, the world wants answers. The next chapter will explore the person at the center of the storm, Princess Eugenie. Once considered a quiet ally, she has now become the accidental whistleblower in a royal saga that threatens to eclipse even the darkest chapters of Windsor history. She was never the loudest, never the most photographed or the most quoted. Princess Eugenie, daughter of Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, existed for much of her royal life in the background. Neither a frontline royal like William nor a rebel like Harry. She was, for lack of better words, the safe royal. Kind, loyal, tactful, but quiet. And that's exactly what made her role in this story so significant. Because for years, while the world speculated, whispered, and argued over Harry and Meghan's choices, Eugenie remained a trusted thread connecting the Sussexes to the rest of the royal fabric. Even after the explosive Megxit announcement, the Oprah interview, and the repeated jabs at the monarchy, Eugenie didn't withdraw. She didn't issue icy statements or cancel holiday plans. Instead, she continued to show up, not for the cameras, but for her cousin. Behind closed doors, she was Harry's confidant, his link to family, his anchor in a world that had suddenly become hostile. So when whispers began to emerge that Eugenie had uttered the words, "They borrowed Augie," the world paused. How could she? Why would she? And was it even possible that someone so loyal, so private, would be the one to break a silence that had held for years? To answer that, one must understand Eugenie's unique position within the royal family. Unlike William, who bears the weight of future kingship, or Prince Andrew, whose scandals have made him nearly radioactive within royal circles, Eugenie carved out her own space, a life partially in and partially out of royal protocol. She held a job, worked in the art world, and avoided the media traps that consumed so many of her relatives. She married Jack Brooksbank in a low-key but elegant wedding that never tried to outshine her cousins. She had her first child, August, in 2021, and introduced him to the world in a gentle social media post. No fanfare, no fuss. And yet, through all of this, Eugenie remained quietly loyal to Harry. In a family where many drew sharp lines in the sand after Megxit, Eugenie didn't. She visited Meghan and Harry in the United States. She was photographed having dinner with them. She attended events at their Montecito home. By all accounts, she was the one royal who tried to bridge the divide. It was this trust, this rare link, that made her the ideal confidant for Harry and Meghan during their most turbulent years. When media criticism peaked and public trust dipped, Eugenie remained a safe harbor, someone who understood royal pressure but also respected personal reinvention. Harry leaned on her emotionally. Meghan, though more guarded, reportedly confided in her as well. Sources close to the couple described Eugenie as the only royal Meghan felt she could tolerate. But trust is a double-edged sword. And when secrets are too heavy to carry, even the most loyal hearts can crack. According to multiple eyewitness accounts, the alleged confession took place during a casual gathering at Meghan and Harry's Montecito estate. Eugenie and Jack had brought little August along, perhaps for a weekend retreat or a quiet family get-together. Those present described the atmosphere as light, wine flowing, music in the background, children playing. But then, as conversations splintered into corners and private chats formed under the soft California sun, something shifted. Eugenie, sipping her drink, leaned in close to a guest she thought she could trust. Her voice was low, her expression weary. It was only supposed to be for a moment, she reportedly said. Just photos. A visit. Meghan said they had no choice. The guest, stunned, pressed further. Eugenie hesitated, then added the words that would soon reach ears far beyond that garden wall. They borrowed Augie. The silence that followed was deafening. Was she joking? Exaggerating? Venting? Or was this the quiet crumbling of a wall built on secrecy? Those who know Eugenie best describe her as deeply empathetic, someone who carries guilt longer than most. And in that moment, it seemed the weight of the secret had become too much. Because if she had, even for a short time, allowed her son to be used to uphold a royal illusion, a fabricated family image, then the guilt wasn't just about deception. It was about trust, identity, and the long-term implications of that choice. People close to her say she regretted the moment instantly, that her expression changed as the words left her mouth. That Jack, standing nearby, shot her a look that said everything. Not here. Not now. But it was too late. Because the guest she confided in wasn't just any guest. They were someone connected, someone who would pass the whisper on, not out of malice, but out of disbelief. And that whisper didn't just float into the void. It landed squarely at the feet of the British media, hungry for the next scandal, and more importantly, curious about the cracks in the Sussex foundation that had long been ignored or dismissed. The revelation shook the very image of Eugenie that many had held for years. How could someone so careful, so principled, be part of something so bizarre? And yet, when viewed through the lens of family loyalty, the picture becomes more complicated. Maybe she didn't believe what she was helping with was wrong. Maybe she believed she was protecting Harry, shielding him from the press, from the pressures of being a royal parent in exile. Or maybe, just maybe, she thought the borrowing was harmless, a gesture of goodwill, a temporary arrangement, something forgotten as soon as it was done. But time has a cruel way of bringing forgotten moments back to light. The whisper of Augie being borrowed has ignited questions no one wants to answer. Was Meghan ever pregnant? Was Lilibet even born in the US? Why were there so many delays in releasing photos? Why was the royal family so hesitant to acknowledge the Sussex children formally for so long? And most painfully, was Eugenie the only one who knew? Insiders have since suggested that other royals suspected something was off, that even Queen Elizabeth, in her final years, expressed concerns over the children's public absence. That Charles, now king, had once demanded a formal introduction to Lilibet but was told the timing wasn't right. If Eugenie had confessed, could she be the tip of a much deeper iceberg? Perhaps the most tragic irony is that Eugenie never meant for any of this to spiral. Her slip, intentional or not, wasn't a political move or a betrayal. It was human, the kind of unraveling that happens when a secret has festered too long, when conscience overrides loyalty, and when love for a cousin collides with the haunting truth of what's been done. In the wake of her confession, Eugenie has gone quiet. No public statements, no denials, no appearances. Those close to her say she's torn, ashamed of what she revealed, but too emotionally exhausted to deny it. And what of her relationship with Meghan and Harry? Sources claim it's shattered. Communication has ceased. Meghan reportedly felt blindsided, betrayed by the one royal she thought would never turn. Harry, caught in the middle, is said to be in anguish. His cousin, his sister figure, the one who always stood by him, may have just detonated the very narrative he spent years trying to control. This chapter doesn't answer all the questions, but it sets the emotional stakes. Princess Eugenie was never supposed to be the one holding the match. But now that the fire's been lit, there may be no way to put it out. It didn't begin with Princess Eugenie's confession, not entirely. In truth, murmurs about Meghan Markle's pregnancies and the authenticity of the Sussex children had existed in the background since long before the whisper in Montecito. But like most conspiracies that orbit public figures, the narrative was mocked, marginalized, and buried under media loyalty and public affection. What Eugenie's words did was crack open a door that had long been nailed shut. And once that door opened, people began to remember all the things that never quite made sense. The theory that Meghan Markle may not have carried her children, or even that Archie and Lilibet may not be her biological children at all, wasn't born overnight. It began with subtle observations, inconsistencies in public appearances, and an overwhelming lack of transparency. While other royals followed well-established traditions regarding childbirth and baby introductions, Meghan and Harry charted a path so unrecognizable to the British public that even staunch supporters were forced to admit this was different. Take, for instance, the pregnancy announcement for Archie. On October 15, 2018, Kensington Palace released a simple statement confirming that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex were expecting their first child in the spring of 2019. Meghan was already in Australia on a royal tour when the announcement came, and though she appeared glowing and upbeat, something felt staged. Commentators noted the rapid shift in wardrobe, the sudden emphasis on holding her stomach, and the way her pregnancy bump seemed to change size and shape from event to event, sometimes within the same day. One particular moment on the Australian tour became a flashpoint for speculation. At an event in Fiji, Meghan stepped away from a market visit, citing crowd pressure as the reason. Yet leaked footage showed her walking briskly moments later, smiling and without security issues in sight. That same day, photographs showed what looked like a shifting baby bump beneath her dress. So dramatic, it sparked an avalanche of online discussions. Was it the dress? A camera angle? Or something more deliberate? Theories began to build momentum. Videos were dissected frame by frame. Side-by-side images appeared showing drastic changes in the bump's appearance, leading some to speculate that Meghan was wearing a prosthetic belly. Others claimed she may have used a surrogate and was simply trying to maintain the illusion of pregnancy for branding reasons. At the time, most mainstream outlets refused to entertain such ideas, dismissing them as misogynistic and rooted in racism. But behind closed doors, and among palace staff, the questions weren't so easily ignored. One former royal aide, speaking under anonymity, admitted years later that a few people noticed odd things during Meghan's pregnancy. There were inconsistencies, timing, logistics, behavior. No one wanted to say it out loud, but the feeling was there. We all sensed we weren't getting the whole story. That aide left the household shortly before Archie's birth and has never spoken publicly since. Then came the birth itself, or rather, the lack of clarity surrounding it. On May 6, 2019, the palace issued a press release stating that Meghan had gone into labor. Less than an hour later, another announcement declared that the baby had been born earlier that morning. The timing was peculiar. How could the palace not know the Duchess had already given birth? Why did they announce the labor after the fact? And why were Meghan and Harry so resistant to releasing details? Instead of the traditional Lindo wing photo call, where royal mothers present their newborns to the press outside the hospital, the couple opted for a private photo session at Windsor Castle 2 days later. When they emerged, Meghan was radiant in a white trench dress, her hair styled, heels on, and makeup flawless. There were no signs of postpartum discomfort, no hospital exit footage, no clear photographic evidence of hospital staff or logistics. Only 2 carefully staged photos and a short, vague statement to the press. Archie's face was partially visible, but the moment felt hollow, controlled, like something scripted more for an advertisement than a celebration. Public interest remained high, but so did suspicion. Online, people asked, where was the hospital? Where were the medical staff? Why wasn't there a doctor speaking to the media, as was customary with royal births? Why did Meghan look untouched by the experience of labor? To many, these questions were cruel and invasive. But to others, they signaled something being hidden in plain sight. Lilibet's birth, 2 years later, only deepened the mystery. Meghan and Harry announced the birth days after it allegedly occurred. The location, Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, was confirmed, but again, no one had seen the couple entering or leaving the facility. Local photographers and press organizations, always keen on a scoop, reported no activity. The hospital remained eerily quiet. Even more strangely, the announcement was paired with no new photo of the newborn, not even a foot or a hand. It took months for a single image of Lilibet to surface, and when it did, she was several months old, smiling in a grassy backyard, still in that familiar turned-away pose that became the Sussex children's trademark. Theories around Meghan's use of a surrogate intensified, but they weren't just limited to online echo chambers. By this point, even some in the media began to question the timeline. Journalists noted that the couple's secrecy was beyond anything previously seen in the royal family, and not just in protecting the child, but in actively denying information that would normally be routine. Meanwhile, royal historians began noting the unusual treatment of Archie and Lilibet within the royal fold. Archie's title was a point of confusion. Initially denied a prince title, then later discussed as possibly being eligible, the explanation never quite landed. Lilibet wasn't publicly acknowledged by the Queen until months after her birth. There were no official christenings, no reports of royal family members meeting the children, and no reliable sightings of the children with extended relatives. This lack of familial integration was unprecedented. One commentator remarked, even Princess Diana, who was hounded by the press, never hid William and Harry. The world saw them grow, change, laugh. But with Archie and Lilibet, it's like they exist only in pixels and press releases. Against this backdrop, Princess Eugenie's alleged confession became far more than a gossip tidbit. It became the missing link that gave legitimacy to long-held suspicions. Her mention of borrowing Augie wasn't just an emotional slip. It was a potential confirmation that at least part of the Sussex children's story was staged. Those defending Meghan argue that even if a surrogate was used, it's her right to keep that private. And indeed, in the modern world, many women choose alternative methods of childbirth for various reasons. But critics counter that deception, particularly when tied to royal lineage, titles, and global branding, changes the nature of the issue. This isn't simply a matter of private family planning. This is about public trust, royal succession, and global perception. If Meghan and Harry did use a surrogate but chose to portray otherwise, they weren't just managing privacy. They were shaping a false narrative, one that helped sell documentaries, books, and media deals. And if, as Eugenie hinted, a royal cousin's child was used temporarily for photographs or appearances, then the situation enters an even darker space, one that involves manipulation, exploitation, and calculated betrayal. As the theory evolved, more people came forward anonymously. One individual who worked with a photo agency claimed that multiple planned photo sessions with Archie were canceled abruptly, always with conflicting reasons. Another source close to the palace claimed that Queen Elizabeth had made several requests to see the children, only to be told they were unwell, out of town, or sleeping. One source even alleged that the Queen, in private, referred to Archie and Lilibet as the digital grandchildren, seen only through carefully filtered images on screens. The theory that once seemed absurd was now being whispered in drawing rooms, production sets, and newsrooms across 2 continents. But no one, not a single royal, former staffer, or journalist, dared to speak it on the record, until Eugenie. And now, everything is shifting. The borrowed baby theory, once a fringe idea, now rests on the edge of mainstream conversation. With every new silence from the Sussexes, every controlled photograph, and every oddity in the timeline, the questions grow louder. The world no longer asks, how could anyone believe this? But rather, what if it's true? The next chapter explores the moment it all came crashing down, when Eugenie, perhaps tired of secrecy, finally let the truth slip in that now infamous garden gathering. It was a warm afternoon in Montecito. The kind of lazy California day where sunlight poured through olive trees and laughter floated on the breeze like it had nowhere better to be. Meghan and Harry's sprawling estate had never looked more inviting. The manicured gardens, the sound of water trickling from stone fountains, the clinking of glasses over patio tables filled with nibbles and fine wine. Guests came in waves, close friends from Los Angeles, a few select neighbors, and, more importantly, family. Among them, Princess Eugenie and her husband Jack Brooksbank stood out, not just because they were British royals in the heart of California, but because they were perhaps the last remaining link between Harry and the royal family back home. Eugenie wasn't like the others. She didn't shun Harry after the infamous Oprah interview. She didn't publicly denounce his decision to leave the monarchy. She stayed silent, smiling in photos, extending olive branches where others wielded cold shoulders. Her presence in Montecito that day spoke volumes. She was still loyal, still trusted, still family, but even the most polished masks can slip under the right pressure. And on that day, something in Eugenie gave way. It wasn't an official gathering or some clandestine meeting. It was just a casual weekend afternoon, one of those rare royal-free royal moments where titles and protocols faded into the background. Children toddled around the garden. Staff moved discreetly with trays. Meghan was radiant, as always, in a flowing cream dress. Harry wore linen and a wide smile, trying to look carefree. The air was warm, the wine flowed freely, and conversations meandered from weather to wedding anniversaries to life back in the UK. At one end of the garden, beneath a flowering arbor, Eugenie found herself in quiet conversation with a guest. A longtime friend of the family, someone she'd known for years. Perhaps it was the wine. Perhaps it was the nostalgia, the ache of being far from home while watching her cousin live in a world so far removed from the one he was born into. Or maybe, after months, maybe years, of holding something she never wanted to carry, Eugenie simply broke. It was only supposed to be for a moment, she said, softly, glancing at her son August playing nearby. Her voice was barely more than a breath. Just photos. A visit. Meghan said they had no choice. The guest paused, unsure if they had misheard. But Eugenie's eyes didn't blink. Her lips trembled just slightly. They borrowed Augie, she continued, her tone almost apologetic. They needed something. They said it was just for optics. A way to calm the press. Just until things settled. The guest, stunned into silence, stared at her, waiting for a follow-up, a joke, a smirk, anything that would suggest this was a misunderstanding or a poorly delivered joke. But it didn't come. Jack, standing a few feet away, must have heard. His eyes locked onto Eugenie's, and though he didn't say a word, his expression was unmistakable. It was the look of a man who had heard this before and didn't want it said again. The guest left shortly after, not out of rudeness, but because they could no longer pretend this was an ordinary garden party. What they had just heard shattered something. It pierced the tightly stitched narrative that had held the Sussex fairy tale together for years. And it did not feel like gossip. It felt like truth escaping from the mouth of someone who never wanted to be the messenger. Within hours, the whisper had spread, not through tabloids, not through the press, but through a network of people who had always been close enough to the royals to recognize when something real was happening. One of those people made a call to a former palisade. Another contacted a freelance journalist who had been chasing inconsistencies in the Sussex baby timeline for years. The flame was lit. By Monday, the rumor had reached 3 royal reporters in London. By Tuesday, it was circulating in private email chains between industry insiders and media executives. All it took was one network to entertain the possibility that the story wasn't a joke. That maybe, just maybe, Eugenie hadn't been exaggerating or drunk, but rather quietly crumbling under the weight of a secret that should never have been hers to keep. What followed in the days after that confession was a scramble of epic proportions. Sources close to Harry and Meghan claimed that the couple was blindsided. They hadn't expected betrayal to come from inside their circle, least of all from Eugenie. Meghan reportedly wept for hours when she was told about the leak. Not because the story was out, but because of who let it slip. Harry, torn between fury and grief, allegedly went silent. One insider revealed that he told Meghan, "She didn't mean to. She's just overwhelmed." And maybe that was true, because those who know Eugenie best insist she wasn't trying to bring the Sussexes down. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't strategic. and she certainly wasn't seeking attention. She was, according to friends, exhausted. From years of carrying everyone else's secrets. From being the bridge. From walking the tightrope between palace loyalty and family compassion. The fallout, though, was immediate. Calls went out. Lawyers were contacted. A wall of silence fell over Montecito. And just like that, Eugenie vanished from public life. No social media posts. No appearances. Even her charity work was put on hold. The palace, always cautious in its responses, offered no comment. But insiders claim that King Charles was furious, not at Eugenie, but at what the slip had confirmed. That there had always been something wrong with the Sussex story, and now, someone inside had said it aloud. Of course, Meghan and Harry issued no statement. They leaned into their familiar defense, silence wrapped in privacy, layered with the occasional leak to friendly media outlets claiming emotional distress. But even they must have known that the damage was done. Eugenie hadn't just cracked their narrative. She had given the world permission to question it again. In the aftermath, whispers about Archie and Lilibet resumed with renewed energy. Online sleuths resurfaced archived photos, redrew timelines, and questioned every movement. Royal biographers who had previously dismissed the borrowed baby theory began reconsidering. There's always been something strange about how guarded they were with the children, one said in an interview. Now, we're starting to understand why. The true tragedy of that day in Montecito wasn't just the words that slipped out of Eugenie's mouth. It was the ripple effect, the breaking of a fragile trust that may never be repaired. Eugenie, who had once stood by Harry when no one else would, now found herself at the heart of a media storm that cast her as both villain and victim. Yet, despite the noise, one truth remained. The words had been spoken. Not by a journalist, not by a critic, but by a princess, a mother, a cousin, someone with nothing to gain and everything to lose. Whether Eugenie regrets her words or sees them as a moment of necessary honesty remains unknown. But what is certain is that her voice, soft as it was, became the loudest in the room. And in doing so, she changed the course of the Sussex narrative forever. For years, Buckingham Palace wore a carefully composed mask, one that conveyed calm, unity, and silent dignity even as the monarchy faced its most destabilizing moments in decades. From Prince Andrew's disgrace to Harry and Meghan's dramatic departure, the crown held its ground, unshaken in appearance. But behind the palace gates, behind the glittering chandeliers and rehearsed statements, the senior royals and their trusted advisors were reportedly navigating a far more complex reality, one riddled with secrets, unease, and, most recently, growing suspicions. What did the palace know about the children of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex? And more importantly, when did they know it? To understand this, one must first acknowledge the unique position the palace holds in royal births and lineages. The birth of any royal child, even those who live thousands of miles away from the monarchy's seat of power, is not just a family milestone. It is a constitutional event. It impacts titles, lines of succession, heraldry, and future royal obligations. And with that comes process, tradition, and documentation. Royal births are not whispers behind closed doors. They are marked events that carry the weight of history and law. With that context in mind, the birth of Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor in 2019 and later Lilibet Diana in 2021 should have been registered with the same solemn care and transparency as other royal children. But they weren't. And this was where the first cracks began to form. When Archie was born, the official birth certificate was not immediately made public. There was an unusual delay in the release, and when it did finally appear, it raised more questions than it answered. The place of birth was listed as the Portland Hospital, a private facility in London, yet no credible sightings of Meghan at the hospital were recorded by local staff, media, or members of the public. Furthermore, the document listed Meghan's occupation as Princess of the United Kingdom, a surprising and controversial label given the couple's public emphasis on independence and modernity. But the strangest part? No photos of Archie leaving the hospital. No interviews with doctors or medical staff. No footage of security motorcades, something that even minor royals receive during childbirth. In fact, there was no visual proof that Meghan had even entered the facility around the time of the birth. For a family so well monitored by the press, This level of stealth was either extraordinary or suspicious. The palace, when asked to comment, remained predictably neutral. The Duke and Duchess have chosen to keep details of the birth private, was the statement offered at the time. Most saw this as a reasonable step for two parents eager to protect their newborn. But others, especially within royal ranks, viewed it differently. Several senior aides reportedly raised concerns behind closed doors. The lack of documentation, the inconsistencies in timing, the secrecy, it was all unsettling. According to a source with knowledge of the royal household's operations, Queen Elizabeth was deeply perplexed by the situation. Her Majesty was always discreet, always respectful, the source explained. But she asked questions. She wanted to meet her great-grandchild in person, and for reasons never fully explained, that introduction was postponed again and again. This detail is crucial. The Queen, by all accounts, loved her family. She made every effort to meet her great-grandchildren, even when her health was declining. Yet for months after Archie's birth, and even longer after Lilibet's, in-person meetings never took place. Reports suggested that Queen Elizabeth only met Lilibet once, during the Platinum Jubilee weekend, and even that meeting was private, brief, and undocumented. Why? Some claim it was due to security concerns. Others cite Harry and Meghan's tense relationship with the press. But those close to the palace saw something else: avoidance, a deliberate effort to limit interaction, a reluctance to expose the children, or themselves, to scrutiny. And the longer it continued, the more uneasy the royal circle became. Palace staff began to quietly refer to Archie and Lilibet as the American royals, not out of affection, but detachment. They weren't present for family occasions. They weren't on the balcony at Trooping the Color. They weren't included in official Christmas portraits. They were, for all practical purposes, ghosts within the royal structure. And when Meghan announced her second pregnancy with Lilibet, things grew even murkier. A photograph emerged, a casual, barefoot moment captured in a sun-dappled garden, with Meghan reclining on Harry's lap, her hand on her growing belly. It was ethereal, poetic, and strategically released during a critical time in their public rebranding. But once again, the timelines didn't add up. Paparazzi had spotted Meghan days earlier in Santa Barbara with no visible bump. The question surfaced again: was this pregnancy real, or another carefully controlled illusion? At this point, senior courtiers had already begun requesting more concrete documentation. According to one source, Prince Charles, not yet king, wanted official copies of medical records confirming the birth of Lilibet. His concern wasn't malicious. It was legal. The line of succession requires clear lineage. For Lilibet to be recognized as eighth in line to the throne, her birth needed to be verifiable under British law. But the Sussexes, now fully immersed in their Californian life, refused to share private records. They cited independence, medical privacy, and distrust of the institution. The palace had no choice but to let it go, at least publicly. Behind the scenes, though, questions continued to simmer. Charles was furious. Camilla, already skeptical of Meghan's influence over Harry, reportedly called the entire situation a circus. And William, although outwardly composed, is said to have distanced himself from Harry further after realizing how deep the deception might run. When Lilibet was baptized in California, the situation worsened. Traditionally, royal baptisms are events attended by senior family members, documented by the press, and conducted by royal chaplains. But the Sussexes held their daughter's baptism in private, without extended family present, and with no photos released. They issued a brief announcement that Princess Lilibet Diana had been christened in front of close friends and godparents. The use of the title princess sparked immediate backlash, especially given their previous renunciation of formal roles. It raised a simple but devastating question. How could a child be given royal status when her very existence remained unverified by the institution? At that point, senior aides reportedly advised the palace to remain silent. There was no winning strategy, one insider said. Challenge the Sussexes publicly, and you risk a global PR nightmare. Let it go, and the institution absorbs the damage quietly. Queen Elizabeth, ever the master of subtle statements, made one final move before her passing. During her last Trooping the Color, Archie and Lilibet were not present, nor were they acknowledged in the official program. It was, in royal language, a silent rebuke. After the Queen's death, King Charles had a decision to make. Whether to extend HRH status to the Sussex children, a choice that would affirm their place in the royal lineage. Many expected him to grant it as a symbolic gesture. But Charles hesitated. Months passed with no announcement. Royal watchers speculated. Insiders whispered. And then came the Eugenie revelation. When Eugenie allegedly confessed that August had been borrowed, even briefly, to support the Sussexes' public narrative, everything clicked into place. The secrecy, the delays, the digital baby photos, the endless refusals to share documentation. It wasn't just about privacy. It was about a truth so explosive that even the most seasoned royal figures refused to acknowledge it. The palace, caught between legal obligations and personal loyalty, now finds itself in an impossible position. If the Sussex children are revealed to not be biologically theirs, or if surrogacy was used without transparency, it would shake the monarchy's foundations. Every royal lineage depends on bloodlines. Titles are not symbolic gifts. They are constitutional inheritances. And if any part of that inheritance is called into question, the repercussions will echo across generations. And so, in silence, the palace continues its carefully orchestrated dance, maintaining appearances, refusing comment, waiting for the next stone to fall. But behind the gilded doors, those in power know the truth. Or at the very least, they suspect it. And suspicion, when mixed with legacy, is a dangerous thing. When Meghan and Harry first stepped back from royal duties and began their independent life in North America, the world watched with a mix of fascination and suspicion. The British tabloids roared in outrage. American media celebrated them as modern revolutionaries, and streaming giants, sensing an unprecedented opportunity, rushed to their doors. In the age of content, Meghan and Harry were a brand, polished, polarizing, and packed with potential. And at the center of that brand was the image of a young, progressive family raising children away from royal constraints. It wasn't just Harry and Meghan who the world was interested in anymore. It was Archie and Lilibet too. Netflix knew this. So when the streaming platform inked a landmark deal with the Sussexes' Archwell Productions in late 2020, it wasn't merely a nod to their celebrity status. It was a calculated investment. According to industry insiders, the deal was reportedly worth up to $100 million. A staggering figure for two individuals with no previous film or television production credits. But it wasn't their resumes that mattered. It was the story they promised to tell. And what story could be more compelling than that of a royal couple torn between tradition and freedom, raising their children in exile, striving to change the world while building a new life from scratch? The first teaser for the Netflix docuseries dropped with great fanfare. It showed grainy black and white images of Meghan and Harry holding hands, dancing in a kitchen, kissing in private moments, and yes, cradling their children. A voiceover from Harry declared, "No one sees what's happening behind closed doors." Meghan added, "When the stakes are this high, doesn't it make more sense to hear our story from us?" The public was hooked. But beneath the surface, some noticed the way the children were always presented, distant, obscured, or in fleeting glimpses. Archie was shown from the back. Lilibet's face was barely visible, if at all. Even in intimate scenes where the family gathered for what appeared to be birthday parties or bedtime stories, the children never quite felt present. They were symbols, shadows, emotional anchors for the Sussex narrative, but always just out of reach. This visual strategy was not accidental. It was deliberate. According to a former Netflix executive familiar with the deal, the inclusion of the children, even in limited visual form, was a core component of the Sussex pitch. They didn't need to show the kids every 5 seconds, the executive explained. But the family dynamic, the visual of Harry and Meghan as parents, was essential. That's what made them relatable. That's what made the project emotionally rich. But what if that emotional richness was rooted in illusion? The moment Princess Eugenie's alleged confession leaked, that her son, August, had once been borrowed by Meghan and Harry for photos. The implications for the Netflix deal became massive. If the Sussexes had used another child in promotional material or behind closed doors to uphold the idea of being parents when the reality was murkier, then Netflix, knowingly or not, had participated in constructing a falsehood. Legal experts began questioning the implications. If any part of the Sussex brand, particularly content funded by major corporations, had been built on unverified or misleading family claims, could the contracts be nullified? Could the streaming giant face scrutiny for not performing due diligence? Could this spiral into lawsuits and reputational fallout? At the heart of these concerns is the concept of authenticity, a word Meghan and Harry have long championed. From their Oprah interview to their podcasts, the couple positioned themselves as truth-tellers in a world of spin. Meghan spoke of trauma, of suicide ideation, of institutional cruelty. Harry opened up about mental health, the pain of losing his mother, and the need to protect his own children from the machine that devoured Diana. And through it all, the children were the silent backdrop, not just as plot points, but as justifications. "We're doing this for our kids," they said, "to create a safer world for them." In that context, the idea that those children may not even be theirs, or that they may have presented them in a misleading way for narrative benefit, changes everything. Netflix has not made a public comment on the matter. When asked for clarification on whether all children featured in the docuseries were, in fact, Archie and Lilibet, a spokesperson simply reiterated the show's intent: to give the Duke and Duchess of Sussex the opportunity to tell their own story, in their own words, on their own terms. But for viewers now watching with a critical eye, those words feel hollow. Behind closed doors, Hollywood insiders claim Netflix executives are nervous. While the docuseries performed well initially, critics have since lambasted it for being shallow, staged, and self-serving. Some reviews noted the lack of genuine emotion from the children, the carefully orchestrated scenes, and the overuse of stock footage and stage photography. But in the wake of Eugenie's alleged admission, those criticisms take on a new meaning. One senior producer, speaking off the record, described the entire production as carefully guarded. According to them, the Sussex team provided all footage themselves. "We didn't shoot the children. That was all them, pre-approved, pre-recorded. We were told not to ask questions." At the time, that level of control didn't raise alarms. Meghan and Harry were known for being protective parents. But now, it reads differently. It suggests more than protection. It suggests fabrication. And what about the public? They bought into the image. They cried during the interviews. They reposted pictures of Archie feeding chickens and Meghan reading bedtime stories. Celebrities hailed the couple as brave. Fans defended them viciously on social media. For many, the Sussexes represented the possibility of escape from toxicity, of starting anew with dignity. But now, as more voices question the very existence of the fairy tale, public trust is faltering. If they lied about the kids, one viewer wrote online, "What else have they lied about?" Others pointed to the commercial motives behind the Sussex narrative. "This was never about freedom," said a critic on a popular podcast. "This was a media empire built on sympathy. And if the kids are part of the script, then everything, every tear, every photo, has to be questioned." Even advertisers, once eager to align with the Sussex brand, are reportedly taking a step back. Meghan's podcast, once backed by Spotify with millions, was abruptly canceled after a single season. Rumors swirled that listener numbers were lower than reported. Now, with the borrowed baby theory casting a long shadow, media buyers are hesitant to touch anything associated with the couple. And what about future deals? The Sussexes reportedly had plans for a children's series, a scripted drama, a second memoir from Harry. But all of it depends on credibility, the one thing that no amount of PR can fully manufacture. Behind the scenes, Harry is said to be spiraling. Those close to him describe a man deeply torn, not just by family betrayal, but by the realization that the house of cards may be collapsing. Meghan, ever the strategist, is reportedly urging restraint, pushing to move forward and ignore the noise. But the noise isn't fading. It's getting louder. And Netflix, caught in the middle, is growing increasingly uneasy about the long-term value of their most controversial investment. For now, the Sussexes remain in Montecito, cameras off, lawyers circling. Their once revered image as royal rebels turned humanitarians is now blurred by suspicion, silence, and scandal. The Netflix deal, which once symbolized liberation, now feels like a ticking time bomb, waiting for the next revelation to blow it wide open. And at the core of it all, two children the world has never truly seen. To understand how Meghan Markle found herself at the center of one of the most perplexing and potentially devastating royal controversies in modern history, one must journey back, long before the titles, the tiaras, the palaces, or the press. Long before she met Prince Harry and stepped into the global spotlight, Meghan had already been engaged in a lifelong performance, a relentless, often unseen battle to shape her narrative and control her identity in a world that insisted on defining her first. Born Rachel Meghan Markle in Los Angeles, she grew up with a front-row seat to Hollywood's glossy illusions and brutal realities. Her father, Thomas Markle, worked as a lighting director in television. Her mother, Doria Ragland, a yoga instructor and social worker, was a stabilizing presence. Meghan's biracial heritage, something she would later speak about frequently, made her feel, in her own words, like an outsider in many spaces. But it also equipped her with the ability to adapt, shift, and read a room like few others. By the time she was in her 20s, Meghan had already begun crafting the version of herself she wanted the world to see. She was ambitious, articulate, and media-savvy. Her early acting roles were modest, a briefcase girl on Deal or No Deal, guest spots on network dramas, but her determination was obvious. She was not content to remain on the sidelines of fame. She understood that in Hollywood, control wasn't just about talent, it was about perception. So she started writing. Her lifestyle blog, The Tig, became a curated window into Meghan's world. Filled with inspirational quotes, wellness tips, food photos, and reflections on womanhood, identity, and purpose. It wasn't just a blog. It was her voice, unfiltered and finely tuned. Through The Tig, she shaped herself as a woman of substance, cultured, compassionate, intelligent, a global citizen, a feminist, someone destined for more than just the supporting role. And then came Suits. Her breakout role as Rachel Zane on the USA Network's legal drama brought her to a broader audience. But even as her fame grew, Meghan was already thinking beyond acting. She aligned herself with humanitarian causes, partnered with the UN, and gave speeches on gender equality. She presented herself as a modern, empowered woman with a deep social conscience, someone who cared less about fame and more about legacy. Control, narrative, image. These weren't accidents. They were strategies. So when she met Prince Harry in 2016, the collision of her carefully constructed world with the archaic traditions of the British monarchy set the stage for a battle no one saw coming. At first, the fairy tale appeared to be unfolding as planned. Meghan, the American actress turned activist, fell in love with a British prince. The press swooned. The public was enchanted. Their wedding in 2018 was a dazzling spectacle, a symbol of progress, unity, and modernity. But it didn't last. Within months, cracks appeared. Meghan bristled at royal protocols. She chafed against the hierarchical structure of palace life. Anonymous staffers began leaking tales of diva-like behavior. Rumors circulated about friction between Meghan and Kate, about Harry's increasing isolation from his brother, and about aides quitting under unbearable pressure. Throughout it all, Meghan remained focused on the one thing she knew best: control. When the British press turned on her, she didn't retreat. She went to war. In interviews, she cast herself as the misunderstood outsider, bullied by a tabloid culture that couldn't accept her race, her independence, or her refusal to conform. When the palace failed to defend her, she and Harry left. And when they were accused of turning their backs on tradition, she countered with stories of mental health struggles, institutional neglect, and racism, framing the departure not as betrayal, but as survival. Motherhood, for Meghan, was not just a personal milestone. It was a political statement. It was the culmination of her reinvention, a woman who had gone from outsider to duchess to mother of royal heirs. To not have that be true, to have faked, borrowed, or misled the world, would be more than a scandal. It would be the unraveling of everything she had built. Some argue that Meghan's obsession with control stems from trauma, that her parents' divorce, her struggles with identity, and her outsider status in Hollywood and the monarchy shaped her into someone who had to grip tightly to her own story. Others say it's pure calculation, that she saw an opportunity with Harry, seized it, and has managed every step since like a seasoned executive managing a brand. Perhaps it's both. People who worked with Meghan during her Suits days recall her as meticulous. One former colleague said, "She wasn't warm, but she was driven. She had a plan. Every moment was curated." Another noted, "She talked a lot about legacy, even back then. She knew where she wanted to go." After marrying Harry, that ambition only intensified. The move to California, the media deals, the high-profile interviews, the children, and the control around their appearances, all of it fit into a larger plan. Not just to escape the constraints of the monarchy, but to outshine it. In Meghan's vision of the world, the royal family failed her. They silenced her, sidelined her, misunderstood her. And in response, she built her own empire, one that looked, on the surface, healthier, freer, more progressive. But if that empire was built, even partially, on a lie, if the children were part of a calculated illusion, then the consequences go beyond scandal. They pierce the heart of her story. Even for those inclined to sympathize with her past struggles, the alleged deception represents a turning point. It raises a painful question. When does controlling the narrative become manipulating the truth? For now, Meghan remains silent. Her defenders call the allegations cruel, sexist, racist. They say she owes the world no explanations, that she is entitled to privacy, to choices, to dignity.